Okay, so at the current moment, what I'm doing is cutting this video to show the carousel demo only for the sole purpose of being able to fully represent the fluidity of the animation and show off some of the functionality of the device that may not correctly be reflected in something like a WebEx or GoToMeeting. Okay. The objective that was stated going into this proof of concept was not just showing a rotating carousel of gadgets which could subsequently be added to a portal page, but also showing that we can reflect certain effects that were present in the given proof of concept. Things like being able to fade out or being able to kind of mist gadgets that were in the background, as well as rescaling those gadgets that were in the background from gadgets that were in the foreground of the page. Okay, one of the approaches that was suggested during the subsequent phone calls was the ability to define a static image. And have said static image be replaced by the live gadget as that particular gadget rotated into view. There would be a difference, and the user may notice a slight shift in what was in the image versus what was in the actual gadget, depending on the frequency with which that image could be replicated and reshown. However, because of the speed of the transition and how we actually accomplish the transition, we've been able to make that particular type of the transition between the static image and the live gadget a lot smoother and something that the user is not going to pick up on unless they really, really look for it. So the technique that we used was being able to first and foremost define a preference on a particular gadget, which is what we would call a thumbnail image preference. And you can see that that is what I've done in the RSS gadget is extended it such that there is a preference in the RSS gadget titled thumbnail image. That's a hidden preference. It's not something that the user can alter when it is brought into the page. And what I did was very quickly just did a quick screen grab of different images that of each one of these gadgets in their current form. So that's the first thing is again this definition of where that particular image is located, and you can see that it's a relative file path: gadgets, images, top stories. If I go and I look at the folder structure of my project, you see that I have my gadgets. I have my gadgets folder. Inside my gadgets folder, I've got an images folder, and then the subsequent images are located there. Again, the flexibility of having a preference is really showing that the user can define where individual thumbnail images are for specific types of gadgets. So they don't all have to be in one centralized location, but they can be if that's something that they were looking for. The next step was making sure that when the rotation was accomplished, that the carousel was going to do those things. So really, there was a little bit of JavaScript that I had to put together, and it came down to extending the Cloud Carousel library. Again, this was kind of a rough and dirty attempt at this. This is something that could be refined and productized going forward. But I think that you'll see that the effect that was subsequently portrayed is adequate to what we were trying to accomplish. Just to give you a quick idea as to what's going on, first and foremost, I'm going to change the background here so it's a lot more readable. That's the first thing. Now let's blow up the text size a little bit so we can actually see it. So you can see that going into the depths of jQuery might be a little bit much, especially going into the depths of jQuery component development. But we've got this idea of a controller. Inside the controller, there is an actual rotate functionality called update all. This is the method on that object that actually allows you to kind of shift those and move those particular objects around. Here's a little bit of geometry that we were programming up to know where that image is actually going to be located as it moves around the carousel oval. And you can see what we're doing is first and foremost we're resizing the image. And the good thing about modern browsers is that when you change the width and height of an image, it actually scales the image. So we get that scaling effect without having to lose any of the resolution, and it doesn't really kind of change the page like scaling a full-fledged gadget would. Scaling a full-fledged collection of DOM objects is a lot more difficult than simply scaling an image. There are effects that allow you to scale a full-on DOM image using the zoom property, but there are browser limitations to that, and the performance of that particular type of method call, especially animating that method call, was not adequate for this particular design. So you can see that one of the things that we've done, and I've got a couple nifty little names for some of my object variables like fade in fool or fade out fool. What I'm doing is as the image rotates and as the opacity changes, essentially from one version of variable to the other, once it gets above 0.5, once it gets above half of that opacity, what I'm doing is I'm shifting and I'm bringing the definition of the gadget back into the forefront so that we can now see the gadget. And then what I'm doing is I'm then changing what the opacity is. So I would be fading out to 0.5, then I'm making the gadget behind it visible, and then I'm fading in to 1. Okay, so that's the effect that we're looking for, and that's what you can see is going on over here. So if we look at what the overall effect is, what the final effect is, and I'm going to update that page. Again, what you can see is that the gadgets are loaded and they're on the side, and then all of a sudden the carousel appears. Again, that's just a matter of putting the correct event handler on the carousel. That basically says that, you know, after the gadgets are loaded, after the carousel is loaded, then actually display the objects inside the carousel. It's just CSS, really. But you can see that the gadgets that I have in the background, not only are they scaled, but they're also faded out, and they're faded out with respect to how far back in the carousel they are. So for instance, if we were to look at the opacity of, let's say, this Google News gadget versus the gadget that we have way in the back, the opacity of the Google News gadget is maybe 0.87, whereas the opacity of the image in the background is maybe 0.5, 0.7, or something along those lines. And since the background that I have behind that image is solid white, you can see that that's why it looks kind of like it looks kind of more opaque than it should. Okay. Whereas the gadget in the forefront, it's big, it's large, it's something that's actionable. So when I start moving this gadget into view, you can see that now it's almost seamless, and the reason that it looks so seamless is because the images are just now being cropped. So as something like a top news story, since that's something that updates on an almost hourly basis, that image might change. And again, there might be some techniques we can do to automate the creation of those images and make them more current. But again, the fade in, fade out procedure is smooth enough that the user doesn't really actually notice the change. And again, their eye isn't being drawn to what's rotating in. Their eye is really going to wait for what the final product is. So again, you can see what the functionality looks like. You can see that we are able to replicate it. And again, this was a very quick way of doing it. For instance, you can see that there's a little bit of choppiness as the images rotate back. That's just me tweaking with the numbers in terms of what I choose to set my opacity to and how I fade in and fade out that opacity. But I think that in my opinion, I think that the example speaks for itself. I think that we can see that, you know, we've accomplished what we set out to do. You see that I've got this add button so that when I do click that, the BBC button, the BBC gadget appears below the carousel in another Portal instance. Again, we can even do things like, you know, all the things that we talked about, which is things like being able to hide or show the gadget preferences based on whether or not the user hovers over the gadget. Again, that's a CSS change. It's not something that's terribly difficult to do, and if it's something that is vital to be able to prove out, we can quickly work that up on later on during the weekend. I can do that over the course of maybe 20-25 minutes, to be honest with you. But hopefully this particular video fully reflects the functionality that we were tasked with replicating. And that this satisfies the curiosity that we had in regards to whether or not certain UI paradigms are possible, as well as seeing the different type of techniques that Backbase has at its disposal to actually make these type of effects, make these type of ideals possible. I'd like to thank you for your time, and we will hopefully be discussing this coming week.